With the footbridge case, with most of the people who answered negatively, that's wrong, as you did, there was quite a lot of activity going on in the parts of the brain we associate with emotions, and not much going on in the cognitive parts of the brain. With the small number of people who said, yes, it would be right to push the stranger, there was some emotional activity too, but there was more cognitive activity. There was more activity in the parts of their brain involved in thinking. So Green's hypothesis was that the reaction to the case of pushing the stranger is one which is more one of these innate, rapid, kind of automatic responses, like that rapid automatic response to what do you think of a brother and sister having sex? Something that is evolved. Whereas in the switch case, there wasn't a kind of evolved response. Now, why would that be? Well, there's a fairly obvious explanation. We have evolved, as I said, from many generations of beings who have lived in close proximity with each other who could harm each other by hands-on physical violence. There's plenty of evidence that humans have, for a long time, used physical violence against each other in various ways. So it's not surprising that we should develop an inhibition against hands-on physical violence of that kind. Those societies that had that, small groups that had that inhibition against doing that to each other anyway, maybe did better. Not, of course, that it's complete. Obviously, we do fight against others, we do terrible things to people, so it's not that this is a complete barrier, but still, if there's some stranger who's done nothing to you, we have an inhibition against doing hands-on physical violence to them. There's nothing in our evolutionary history that suggests we should have any reactions to throwing switches that divert trains down side tracks. We haven't had switches or trains for long enough to influence our evolution in that kind of sense. So Green's view was that there is this kind of innate reaction that says yuck to pushing the stranger. No, you can't do that. And that prevents the cognitive functions deciding the issue. Whereas in the switch case, there's no innate response, and so the cognitive functions, the thinking, can decide the issue. And what do we think? We think, well, save 5 lives, lose 1 life. Yes, that's worth doing. I don't know anything about these people, they're strangers. There will be 4 lives saved, a net 4 lives saved, and that's worth doing. Now, if Green is right about that, and there's certainly plenty of scope for debate and there's more research going on about it, but I think the research as it stands favours Green's hypothesis here. If that's true, then we can draw a distinction in our moral thinking and our moral judgments between those judgments that are evolved and innate in that way and that exist in us because they were conducive to the survival and reproduction of our forebears, and those judgments that are not there for that reason. Now, what would you do with this distinction if you can make it? Remember, I said right at the beginning that we can't conclude that evolution, it's a mistake to think that evolution somehow is tending in a morally good direction or is right. And it would equally be a mistake to think that because some judgment is innate in us and is the product of evolution, that judgment is somehow better than another judgment. Sometimes people think a little bit like that. When people hold up something that is natural and say that that's better than something that is artificial or made by humans, there's something a little bit like that kind of thinking going on. But I think it's a mistake. In fact, I think here we ought to think the opposite. We ought to think, this is a judgment that we have only because in many generations of our ancestors it was conducive to survival. But perhaps circumstances have changed. Perhaps it's not a judgment that we should be following when we stop and think about it, when we think more carefully about it. Perhaps it's one of those judgments that really is not what we want to commit ourselves to when we reach our own thoughtful, reflective judgment. So we might say the reasoning that takes account of the consequences, that thinks it's better to save 5 lives at the cost of 1 life than to allow 5 people to die in order to prevent 1 person dying, that kind of thinking that looks at the consequences is our more rational nature. That's us being thoughtful and reflective. The other judgments are us simply taking these intuitions that are part of our evolutionary history and taking them for granted as somehow guides to right and wrong when they may not be so. Now, I don't want to say that we should always disregard our intuitive judgments. They often may be a useful guide to things that work well in a society. That, this is what human nature is like in some ways, and sometimes it's going to be difficult to change it in some respects. But I do think that the fact that we have one of these intuitions should not be taken as a reliable guide to what's right and what's wrong. And often I think we have, in fact, got past some of those judgments. For example, I think you could argue that some kind of feeling for those who are like you is innate and natural over those who are not like you. There's been research that shows that if you show babies faces of people who are like them, that is, members of the ethnic group, their parents and their family, and the faces of people who are of a completely different ethnic group who look different, they will preferentially go towards those who look like them. So maybe at some level there's a kind of innate racism that leads us to prefer our own kind, and that lies behind some of the greatest moral atrocities that have been committed in recent centuries. But we know that we can get beyond that. We know that we can maybe not eliminate all racist ideas, thoughts, feelings entirely, but that we can have viable, functioning, multiracial societies. We're living in one. We've seen enormous progress in that sort of area. Look at what happened in the American South after the 50s desegregation, where people who you would have thought could never live in harmony alongside each other do live in reasonable peace and harmony alongside each other. So we can use our reasoning, getting the larger picture, to think that some of these innate ideas are wrong and mistaken and no longer suitable for the times that we're living in. So this is the way in which I think, the most interesting way in which evolution can help us to understand ethics. It can actually help us to be more critical of what evolution has made us. It can help us to think more critically of some of those intuitive, rapid judgments that we form. And I think it should lead us, as Green's example suggests, to being more consequentialist in our thinking. That is, to taking greater account of the consequences of what we do and being less restricted by some of those intuitive responses that sometimes may prevent us from doing what is going to be the best thing in the circumstances. So if you want my take on the trolley problem, I don't think there is a moral difference between the two cases, really. I can certainly say I would find it much harder to push the stranger off the bridge than to throw the switch, because I'm, like all of you, I have this innate repugnance against doing it. And I'm not sure whether I could do it if I were in that situation. But I do think that I would be right to do it if I were in that situation and if I knew what would happen. And I think I would be just as right, and for just the same reasons, as I would be right to throw the switch in the switch case rather than the footbridge case. So I'm coming to the end of the time that I was allocated, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. But let me just give you one more example where I think that this can make a difference, and it relates to a number of the other things that I'm interested in, and that is in extending our moral concerns beyond our own group. I wrote a book many years ago called The Expanding Circle, which in fact Princeton University Press is going to reissue later this year. And it was talking a bit about some of the things that I've talked about today, although of course it couldn't take account of the more recent research by Haidt and Green that I've talked about. But my idea was that we have expanded the circle of moral concern over the millennia, so that from that small group of 150 or 200 people that humans mostly lived in, which was concerned for itself, and we know places where that has, until quite recent times, still been the case. I went to New Guinea in the 60s, and in the highlands of New Guinea, when people told me there that until Europeans came into some of those areas, they could not cross the mountain range and walk into the neighbouring valley down the other side of the mountain range. They would have been killed, because the morality that they had, and the same would have happened to someone who'd come over the ridge down their side, because the morality that they had was that you were concerned about the welfare of the people in your group, in your valley, but the stranger from across the mountain range you could kill with impunity. So we've expanded that to the idea of being concerned for the nation, some larger group, and now in the 20th century, after watching the horrors that racism caused in Nazi Germany in particular, we adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that we are concerned about all human beings and that we all think they all have basic rights. But that doesn't go far enough in two respects. Firstly, although we say that, we don't live up to it. This goes back to what I was saying before about how we don't help the 15 million people who die each year in extreme poverty where we could help them. And we also don't go beyond our own species. And, well, maybe we've started to a little bit, but we don't really extend morality fully to other sentient beings who are not human. So I think this clearly also has something to do with the fact that we have evolved to prefer those who are like us, and to be very concerned about those close to us, about our kin and our immediate group, but not those who are distant, whether geographically distant or a member of another species. So we've had an immense amount of coverage recently of course, the natural disasters in Australia, the floods, of Cyclone Yasi. You compare that with the amount of coverage that we'll get for a cyclone that hits, let's say, some part of Latin America or some part of Burma or of something of that sort, with far more people killed but far less coverage. Now that's the way we are. I guess the newspapers will say, well, people are more interested in reading about people in their own country close to them and so on. Yeah, that is the way we are. We recognise that. But I think ethically we need to do our best to work beyond that. And that, I think, is one of the lessons of understanding evolution, that we understand that the idea within us that says we really only need to be concerned about those very close to us is something that may well have helped us and our ancestors to survive, and part of the explanation for why we're here is that they were concerned about those who are close to us. But that is not a justification of it. It's an explanation of our moral judgments, not a justification of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Just a reminder about the procedure for questions. There's a microphone in the central aisle there. If you'd like to ask a question, please come up and line up at the microphone. and Peter will take questions in order.
Good evening, Professor, and thank you for the talk. I have two questions. One is, what is the role of the innate quest to excel of human beings in your talk? I mean, in your ideas on evolution and ethics. Question number one. And question number two, there seems to be a great challenge in terms of dealing with environmental change, in the sense that the first world is more willing to reduce the population of the third world rather than make concrete, drastic sacrifices in their lifestyles that would actually make a bigger change, a bigger impact at a sooner time. So those are my two questions.
Thank you. Okay. So the quest to excel, I guess, could be understood as something that confers an evolutionary advantage. That is, there are advantages in standing out in some ways. There can also be dangers, of course. But I suppose for much of our history, if you excelled in some skills, you were valued in the community, and the community would help you more. Regarding the environmental challenges that we face, I think this is an interesting example, an interesting application of what I have been talking about. Because, as I said, we've evolved to think that it's very bad to do, normally bad to do, hands-on physical violence to people close to us or people we know are innocent. And yet, we have not evolved to think about the environmental consequences of our lifestyle. There's no kind of negative response to the idea of emitting greenhouse gases, for obvious reasons. We didn't know until relatively recently that emitting greenhouse gases was causing harm. So it's something that we have not evolved to do, and that's one of the reasons, I think, why it's so difficult, as your comments suggested, to make the lifestyle changes that are needed if we are to stop causing harm to people who are less able to defend themselves from it than we are. Thank you.
Oh, Professor, I would like to also thank you for a most stimulating talk. What do you think of the proposition about the naturalistic fallacy being itself a fallacy, the naturalistic fallacy being the logical impossibility of passing from an is to an ought? Can it not be said that both of these statements are really assessments based on past experience and not based on any sort of absolute certainty? And both of these questions rely on the consensus of the people in the community, and that there's a spectrum where there's a greater probability of an is statement being right than an ought statement being right. If I can have another couple of quick bites.
Look, I think we do have quite a few people behind you already, so I think if you don't mind, we'll try and limit it to one question. Thank you very much. I do think that the naturalistic fallacy is a fallacy. I'm not one of those... that is, in other words, I think it is a fallacy to try to deduce a moral judgment or a value judgment from facts. It's essentially, well, very close to anyway, the point that when I referred to David Hume as saying you can't get an ought out of a set of is judgments. That does seem to me to be the case, and I wouldn't agree with you that it's simply a matter of experience. I think there is a logical problem, as Hume said. I mean, we generally accept that at least deductive arguments, the conclusion must in some way be contained in the premises. And if there's no ought or values in the premises, you're not going to be able to get an ought or value in the conclusion. Thank you.
Yes, I had a question about your conclusion on the trolley problem, and I'm perhaps biased by the fact that I was one of the people who thought that turning a switch would be wrong. So it seemed to me that your conclusion was based on a view that 5 lives was worth more than 1, and that you could make the decision about whether that 1 life was worth more or less than the 5. And I thought that the reason why turning the switch was wrong was essentially because you should have the same response to it as you do to committing a murder, which is that you shouldn't make the choice. I mean, there are 5 men working in a tunnel in a dangerous profession of which, to quote, I guess, the leader of the opposition, shit happens. So that they're in what if the person on the track is a child? Or what if the 5 people in the tunnel are a child and there's an old man on the tray? So there are all sorts of variations you could make where you're making decisions about which life is more valuable. And is it just numbers that leads you to make that conclusion?
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting comment. You're right, and Green and others have been aware of this point, that people may have different reactions if they think in some way some of the people have consented to be working in a dangerous area and others have not. That's why when I gave you the switch case, I said that there's 5 workers in the tunnel and 1 worker on the sideline, so they're all workers, track workers there. I probably failed to say that, but perhaps should have said that the heavy stranger on the bridge with the backpack is also a worker, if you like. In other words, we want to try and eliminate that bias, or that possibly relevant, I won't argue whether it is or is not morally relevant factor, and try and equalise it. And if we do, then I am prepared to say that I think it's better to save more lives rather than fewer lives. And I am prepared to say that, yes, you're justified in making that choice. Remember, I did say that they're all strangers, that you don't know anything about them. You know, if you were given a lot of detailed information, this one is supporting a family, these ones are single, you know, this one has achieved this, or everybody loves him, he's a decent person, these ones cheat and lie all the time. You know, all of those things would be relevant, I guess, and would complicate the thing. But if we're just saying these are all strangers, I know nothing about them, I think in general it's better to save more people rather than save fewer people. In just the same way, I guess, that if, it's another example philosophers have come up with, if there is a storm, or let's say there's a flood, if you like we've had, the waters are rising, there's one house there and you can see one person standing on the roof, there's another house over there and there's 5 people standing on that roof. You only have a rowboat, it's going to be slow, you're battling the current, you probably are only going to have time to get to one house, you know nothing about any of the people. I think you ought to go to the house with the 5 people on it. You've got room for 5 people in your rowboat, we assume. I think it would be crazy to either go to the house that has 1 person on it or to say, well, I'll toss a coin. I don't think things are equal. I think we ought to save more people when we can. And, you know, you're right, a small number of people tend to think the switch case is wrong because they don't want us to make that choice. But I do think we should make that choice.
Yeah. I know you said only one question, but this is more a comment. The thinking rationally about trying to say that, in fact, the physical response is the correct one, it feeds into what you were saying about the environment, because essentially what you're saying is it's okay to kill somebody using a switch, and then you decide from that then it must be okay to actually physically push a fat man over a bridge in order to save 5 other people. And yet, well, essentially the question is, should we feel better about, should we not rationally think that the things that we do with technology should be responded to in the same way as the things we do directly with our bodies? So poisoning the environment is as bad as poisoning.
And my answer to that is yes. My answer to that is yes, which is why I think in both the switch case and the footbridge case you should do it. And I also think we should regard ourselves as responsible for the people who are dying because of our greenhouse gas emissions. Hard to do that emotionally, but I think we should. Okay, we must move on. Thank you.
I was just wondering what you thought of Sam Harris and his moral landscape in his attempt to objectively obtain an ought from a series of is, and on a related note, whether it's okay to embed a subjective goal, namely to achieve a flourishing society within an actual term like morality.
Okay, I think Sam Harris in the book The Moral Landscape does commit the naturalistic fallacy, or the fallacy of deducing an ought from an is, and I think to the extent that it does that, the book is fallacious, although there are many things that Sam Harris writes that I agree with and admire. I've been on a panel with him about this topic actually a few months ago, and we disagreed on it. I think that the way he could do it, the way he should do it, is, you referred to the idea of a flourishing society. He should say, look, this is what I think we ought to value, or argue for the idea that we ought to value societies like this, that have these goods. I mean, he has certain things that he thinks are good, and generally they are things that I think are good, like human happiness, human flourishing, and so on. And he ought to say, well, this is a value that I don't think we can get from science, But I do think it's a value that many people hold, and maybe if they cleared up their thoughts from some of these false superstitions that religion teaches them, because he's a strong critic of religion, and I think that it's true that a number of false moral conceptions are things that people get from their religious beliefs or religious backgrounds or get into the culture through that. If we didn't have that, then we would be readier to see that these goals of happiness are what's important. So I think that Sam Harris could get to really all his important conclusions without saying, as he unfortunately in my view does say, that this is somehow something that you can get out of science or out of evolution or something of that sort.
But you agree that it's okay to embed that subjective goal into the term itself of morality, so we can define morality to mean achieving...
Look, I think the trouble with defining morality to mean that is that if somebody doesn't share that goal and disagrees with you, then you're just saying, well, this is not a moral disagreement we're having because morality is defined as being about these goals and this human flourishing. Whereas the person will think that they are having a moral disagreement. So we would need to invent some other terminology for the kind of disagreement we're having. So I don't think you achieve very much by trying to win that argument, in a sense, by definition. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I've got questions about the examples that you gave. Most of your examples, the moral instinct prevents a rational moral choice, as I understand this. What about the opposite case where our moral instinct kind of helps us making moral choices, and if we start rationalizing, we are more inclined to actually act immorally? So an example is we all wouldn't steal from an old woman in the post office if she picks up a pension, but white-collar criminals are quite happily taking away her pension via pushing a button or some fraud. I mean, there you would wish there would be something like a moral instinct preventing them from doing this.
Right. Okay. Yeah, good point. In fact, some people have made this against an argument that I use to argue that we ought to help the global poor. In The Life You Can Save and in a much earlier article, I asked people to imagine that they could save a drowning child in a pond in front of them. And of course, if you say to people, well, suppose that you see a small child who's fallen into a pond and you know it's a shallow pond and you can easily save the child, and the only cost to you is that you'll ruin a nice pair of shoes that you put on this morning, would it be wrong to say, no, I don't want to ruin my shoes, I'm not going to save the child? Everybody says, of course, that would be wrong. And then I say, well, if the cost of your shoes could, if given to Oxfam, could save somebody, a poor child in another country, isn't it wrong not to give? And some people have said, well, yes, but the argument trades on the instinctive response I have, I should pull out that child. And that's rather like your case, I think. The argument against the white-collar crime trades on the instinctive response, I should not rob the pension of this elderly widow. So I would say yes, but in this case, when we reflect on the instinctive response, we can see that it is part of a general moral attitude that we want to defend, and that we can defend through thought and reasoning, not only through the particular instinctive response. So in that sense, I think it's different from some of the other examples, because our reasoning enables us to put ourselves in the position of others and say, yes, I would hate it, let's say, if imagine it was my child and some stranger hadn't saved that child because he didn't want to spoil his shoes. How awful that would be, how indefensible that would be. And then we can generalize from that to say we want a society in which people make small sacrifices to prevent great harms. And so we get to a broader principle that I think we can defend. So it's a bit of a more complicated story, but I think I can distinguish the intuitive judgment you mentioned from the ones that I think we want to reject. Thank you.
Hi. You said that we have made many of our moral values based on evolution. For example, the brother having sex with his sister immediately seems wrong to us because of the fact that that would mean inadequate offspring. Do you think that the sense in society, especially in the teenage world, of never sticking from the crowd or conformity was possibly evolved from the sense some time ago to tactically sense never to stray from the pack, or like when hunting or working in the pack, the leader barks orders at you?
Yes, I think that's a good example. I think we do have a conforming instinct. It's not only teenagers. Maybe you may think it's strongest among teenagers, but there's plenty of psychological research that shows that people are more likely to behave in a certain way if they see somebody else already doing that. This applies both to helping someone. They're more likely to help if they see others helping, and also failing to help. They're more likely to fail to help if they see others aware of the problem but not helping. So what's the evolutionary basis for this? Yeah, it could well be that we move as groups, we work as groups, and to some extent it's dangerous to stand out from the group. It draws attention to ourselves, and although obviously there may be occasions where that has great benefits too, there probably are more occasions where standing out from the group is a high-risk activity.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm being told I need to take 2 more questions. I'm sorry for those who are further back in the line.
Thank you, Professor Singer. I think it was Yeats who said rhetoric is fooling others, but sentimentality is fooling yourself. I was wondering if there's any way to quantify the way that we emotionally react to certain situations and bring in that ethical sort of perspective into the things we do every day. Like, we react emotionally to different things and different situations. And is there a quantitative element to that irrational?
I don't know that we have ways of, of quantifying our emotions and their reactions. Of course, look, I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm saying that we should be purely rational beings and not take account of our emotional lives. We can't live like that. We shouldn't live like that. We are responsible for bringing up children, those of us who are parents, and love for your children is such an important part of what gives them a good childhood and makes them become good, all-rounded, well-balanced citizens. So we certainly don't want to squash that off at all. But sometimes I think we should recognise that our emotional responses are not the right ones for the situation, that they're there but they're inappropriate. So if you like, I think the cognitive aspects, the thinking aspects, ought to be there, and we ought to be reflective on occasion as well as following those emotional responses. Thank you. Okay, and I'm sorry we're going to have to make this the last question.
Thanks. So a lot of your discussion today has been about taking a particular case and then extending it more broadly, like making it coherent perhaps and things like that. But I'm just wondering, isn't there a possibility we would be happier with, say, incoherent or untruthful ethical or other beliefs?
Okay, so this is a way of saying that I'm talking about trying to understand things, trying to get at the truth, but as it's sometimes said, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. So maybe we're better off being left in blissful ignorance. Look, I think there is an argument to be made in that direction. I certainly don't think, for example, that you should always tell the truth no matter what the circumstances, no matter how hurtful that's going to be, no matter how dangerous. I mean, there are philosophers who've said that. Immanuel Kant, famously, the 18th century German philosopher, said you should never tell a lie, even if you're speaking to somebody who is a would-be murderer who wants to kill somebody who is hiding in your house and asking you if you know where that person is. You should still not lie. I certainly don't accept that view. That's, if you like, the antithesis of the sort of consequentialist view that I was talking about. So yes, I will say there are some circumstances where it may be better not to tell the truth, not to know the truth. But I think understanding ourselves, understanding human nature and understanding ethics is an important part of the things that we need to do to advance ethically and to adapt to the changing world. Because I think we face a lot of ethical problems which are new, which previous generations did not face, or certainly if you go back to earlier centuries, did not face. And I think it's very likely that inherited ethics that we have from our evolutionary past is not the best suited. So at that broad level, I do think it's important for us to know and understand the truth and to try to use that to make wiser ethical choices. Thank you very much for coming and for your attention.